Hello and welcome to the Divorce to Bliss podcast. Here you will learn all things related to healing from divorce, mind, body, and spirit, so you can create a beautiful new life filled with happiness. I'm Rachel Ruby, author of Divorce to Bliss, divorce coach, speaker, and attorney, and I'm so glad you found me here. Hello and welcome to the Divorce to Bliss podcast. I'm Rachel Ruby, and this episode is called Unmute Yourself. And I say that with vigor, unmute yourself, because we're going to talk about some really serious things that hold us back from being who we truly are and from healing from divorce. So you have to remember that no one hands you a mute button in marriage, but somehow so many women end up pressing it anyway. So let's dive into what this means. What does it mean to mute yourself? What does this actually mean? Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, my own personal story. And about probably 2 years before I decided I wanted to get divorced, I started recognizing that I was muting myself, silencing myself, right? And it would normally come when there was a confrontation about something and with my former spouse. And it could be anything from where, why don't you want to kiss me anymore, to, we need to do this or we need to do that, or even in a conversation about a child. And what I noticed was when I would make a comment on what I felt or believed or what my emotion was regarding that situation, I would be met with several things. One is I would be met with the counter comment from my former spouse, which was completely opposite of what I felt, not in any way acknowledging what I felt, but just simply, this is what I feel and this is what it is. And so I would speak my voice because I've always been a strong woman. I've never had a problem using my voice. It's gotten me into some tricky situations, but I'm proud of it because I think it's important to speak your truth. And so when I would do that, I noticed that it kept getting more and more controversial, and it started getting even manipulative in some situations. So I started muting myself, and I didn't even realize really I was doing this. And at some point, sometimes I did. Times I thought to myself, I don't even want to get into this right now. I don't want to argue about it. I don't want to talk about why I'm feeling unheard or why I feel my point is strong while he's sitting here espousing all the reasons why his point is the right one. So I did. I muted myself. And when I started doing the healing work, about 6 months or so probably before it was actually 1 year before I got divorced, because when I told him I wanted a divorce, he said he wanted some time to try to work on it. And so I said, okay, I'll give it 1 year. Let's take 1 year. Let's go to therapy, couples therapy, and separate, individual therapy, and see how it goes. And during that year, I started working on myself very deeply. And one of the things I worked on was this muting of myself, because I didn't like how that felt, and I wanted to get my voice back. So that's one of the ways that we can mute ourselves, by holding back opinions just to keep the peace, or because we want to be likable. Let's say in another type of relationship, we want people to like us. We don't want them to think, if everyone has a certain opinion, that our opinion's different, right? But in the marriage, we sometimes we can shrink ourselves to just kind of survive. And this also happens a lot in abusive relationships, but this can also happen in non-abusive marriages, and it does all the time, which is case in point in my own marriage. Also, another way that we mute ourselves is by not expressing our emotional needs. If we need some time, let's say we need to take a break from something that we're working on together, so we can just take time to ourselves and work on it. Let's say maybe we want to go visit our friend for 2 nights or something, and the spouse gets really upset because you're in the middle of going through something. But sometimes you need that space, and you have to speak up, and you have to take it and put yourself first, because when you come back, you are going to be able to better talk to your partner and hopefully listen to each other as well. Another thing that we do is, like I said, avoiding conflict at all costs, because we don't want to have that feeling of being controlled or manipulated, or having someone clearly not listening to us and place little or no value in what we're saying. And becoming more agreeable is also another way that we mute ourselves. Rather than expressing our opinions, we'll just say, oh yeah, you're right. So something to remember, that muting is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's very subtle. But what it does is it slowly erodes your voice. And when you erode your voice, you're eroding your truth, and you are not supporting yourself and loving yourself. So let's talk about how we get there. How do we get there? How do so many women get to the point where they're muting themselves? One is that we just kind of lean into acceptance, like I mentioned before, kind of becoming more agreeable type thing, or just accepting what's being said that's counter or in opposition to what we feel or believe or what our emotions are. And that is, again, because we usually just want to prevent an escalation. And we also get there because we might be afraid. Fear, as you know, I talk about this a lot on the podcast, is so huge when it comes to divorce. So we might have fear of conflict with the spouse. We might have fear of abandonment. I remember in my marriage at one point when my former spouse was talking to me, and I didn't want to have intimate relations with him that night. And he said to me, well, then we should just get divorced. And this was long before I had ever even thought about getting divorced, right? So, and it made me scared in that moment. So that could be another reason why we start to mute ourselves. And also, we also may not want to have a label put on us, like you're too emotional or you're just too much. And there's also the power dynamics, right? Which is super important, because that can be emotional, it can be financial, it can be personality. It's mostly just a control issue. And sometimes if you are with a controlling partner or a manipulative partner, or someone who wants to always be in the right, that definitely can be a situation which would cause you to mute yourself. And lastly, people pleasing. People pleasing is huge, right? Most of us want to be liked. Those are reasons why or how we mute ourselves. Not all muting is conscious. Like I said, I wasn't aware of it for a while that I was muting my voice. Not all muting is conscious. And sometimes you didn't choose the silence. You adapted the silence. You enabled it to come into your body and into your being in order to survive. And when you're in that survival mode, it's usually being run by fear. And that's why when you recognize this, that you're doing this, it's your chance to rewire. So let's talk about the costs of staying muted. And I think those are pretty obvious. We lose our personal identity. That's the biggest cost, right? Because we become somebody we may not even recognize. I did. I was, like I said, very vocal, very unafraid of speaking my truth. And I really didn't recognize myself when I started doing the healing work and realized that I had muted myself so much. And also, we tend to build resentment. We may, and usually do, emotionally disconnect from our spouse, and we might feel invisible and unheard. And that all of those things can also lead to physical stress and anxiety. And that's perfectly normal, because obviously you're not speaking your truth and you're holding back. And so that can create a lot of anxiety within. You're technically not alone, but you feel completely unseen and unheard. So here is the key part, the key thing I'm going to say in this podcast today, and when it comes to unmuting yourself. And that is that the mute button does not disappear when the marriage ends. You have to consciously turn your volume back up. When the marriage ends, because you've now created a pattern within yourself to mute yourself, you might still want to people please when you go out and date. And by the way, if you haven't solved this yet and you haven't healed yourself, you shouldn't be dating, in my opinion, right? After divorce, because this is a huge part of rebuilding yourself and becoming the higher version of yourself, which will then attract a different partner, not the same partner with a different name and face, right? So if you are still muting yourself because you want to people please and avoiding speaking up and maybe even second guessing your needs, if you don't know what your needs are at all, even, those are problems that are going to come out when you get into a new relationship. And also just that uncomfortable feeling of not being seen, not being heard. So you really need to work on this so that you can turn your own volume back up and stop being muted. So now let's talk about the unmuting process and how we do this, okay? The first way that we start unmuting ourselves is through awareness. And awareness is key in many things that we learn about ourselves when we're going through the healing process. We want to identify and recognize that we are doing this, that we did this in the marriage. It's probably something that you don't like about yourself and want to change. And I've spoken to women who have gone through this for many years past the divorce, so many years. I spoke with one woman who went through it for, I think, over 10 years past her divorce. She was still muting herself in relationships with others, with not just with men, but with friends of hers. When she felt like someone had a strong opinion, instead of expressing her opinion, she would tone it down. And when she realized that she was doing this, it was just like this floodgate opened, and she said to herself, oh my gosh, I need to take me back. I need to unmute my voice because I want to be heard. I want to be seen as the person I am. And I recognize that only when I do that, as I'm going to heal and I'm going to be happy because I'm going to be speaking my truth. So I want you to start to listen when you're talking to someone, or even in your own head when you're listening to someone, and in your mind, you're maybe not saying something and you're holding something back. And I want you to write this down in your journal. And this is huge, because every time you catch yourself holding back or saying something that's not really what you think, maybe you say something and your comment is smaller. For example, someone might say, this pen is black, right? And you might think the pen is not black, the pen is gray. And you say, well, it really doesn't look black. Okay, that's a gentle way of saying it, but then they might come back to you and say, of course it's black. What, do you not see this? Compare this to my shirt, it's black. And then at that point, you kind of silence yourself because you don't want to get into an argument. You don't want to make it uncomfortable for yourself. And so I want you to write every one of these things down. And whether it's a soft mute or it's just a complete mute, right? And continue to be aware of this when you are in conversations with people, with others, or even listening. And number 2 is a small dose control moments. And this small dose control moments allow us to unmute ourselves, but not completely. So instead of just speaking your idea that is completely in opposition, let's say, to someone else's, you might do it in a little micro way. For example, you might couch it in terms of a preference. If someone says something to you like, oh, we all want to go to this bar tonight, and you really don't want to go there, instead of just saying, I don't want to go there, I'd rather go here, you might say, well, I think I'd prefer if we went to this place. And it's a little bit more subtle, but you're still speaking your truth, and you're just putting it in a, I guess, a more comfortable way for yourself. So it's okay to have these little microdose moments where you say something that isn't full blown in opposition to something, but, well, I think I'd rather, or in some small, safe way that makes you feel more comfortable. Number 3 is to really reconnect with yourself and your feelings and your emotions and your needs. And we do this by asking ourselves, what do I like now? What do I want now? What do I believe now? What is it that I want to see unfold in this higher version of myself? The perfect place to figure this out is writing it down in your journal and really learning about who you are, what you want, and that way you can grow in that direction. Next is learning how to tolerate the discomfort. And the way we start doing this is to realize that we might feel uncomfortable. It might feel unnatural for us to speak up at first, and that's okay. That is okay. And that's why we're going to maybe use small microdose moments, but tolerate that discomfort. Say it anyway. Know that when you say it, you might feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. And then you can go back and talk about it in your journal. And then the next time you do it, you might feel a little less uncomfortable. And each time you do it thereafter, and as it becomes more a part of you to speak your truth and unmute yourself, you'll be amazed when you look back and see what you wrote when you were so had so much discomfort and you will recognize that you are actually coming out of that and you are able to speak and unmute yourself. The last step in the unmuting process is setting boundaries for yourself, because it's so important that we have boundaries and we know where we're comfortable going and where we're not comfortable going. And if you don't have boundaries, your voice isn't going to stick. So if you feel really strongly about something and somebody is arguing with you and they feel really strongly about something and it's not going to go anywhere, you can make a comment to the effect that, hey, we obviously have differences of opinions. You think the pen is black. I think the pen is gray. So I'm not going to argue about this anymore, but we have a difference of opinion, and you can kind of end it there. And you can try out other boundary setting ways that might make you feel better. And it all really comes down to your own personality and what makes you comfortable. The key takeaway of all of this work on unmuting ourselves and speaking our truth is that we are going to rebuild our identity after divorce. We're going to rebuild it and maybe reshape it and become a higher version of ourselves, because we'll be more confident with our voice and with what we want and need. So we want to rediscover our desires. We want to rediscover our personalities sometimes, because they've been so, quieted down by the muting that we may not even recognize who we are anymore. And we want to rediscover our values and our wants and needs. And we also want to try things that we previously suppressed. This is really important. If we were the quiet mouse in a conversation where someone was really dominating and we wanted to prevent escalation, we want to try new ways to speak and not be afraid of what we have to say and to speak our truth. And again, that might be done in little microdose ways in the beginning, but we definitely want to try things that we suppressed before, because that's the only way we're going to change. And we also want to let ourselves become this higher version. We want to evolve into this better version of ourselves and not let ourselves slip back into what was once comfortable, which was being the quiet mouse and not speaking our truth. And that's really important to recognize. So you have to remember that you're not unmuting the old version of you. You are discovering the truest version of who you are in here, in your heart. And you are not letting any walls go up that would prevent you from being that true version of you. So I'm going to leave you with a homework step in this next week before the next podcast is released. I want you to write in your journal, where in your life are you still muted? And it can be in several places. It can be with certain people, but I want you to write it down. It could even be, you might still be muted with your former spouse. Maybe you have children together and you have to still stay connected with that as co-parents, and you're still muting yourself with that person. Or it could be with anyone. I want you to recognize where in your life you are muting your voice. And then I want you to find one thing that you can say out loud this week that you have been holding in. Okay. So again, let's say it's with your former spouse and you're co-parenting and he says, I'm going to do this with the children, or I'm going to change my day this week from Tuesday to Thursday. And you say, no, you're not, because I have plans on Thursday, rather than just going back to maybe what the old you would have said, which was, oh, okay, that's fine, even though you might not have felt that way. So I want you to do one thing this week that causes you to maybe be uncomfortable, step out of your comfort zone, and really say something out loud that you've been holding inside. And I'm going to leave you with this. You don't need permission to take up space, to be heard, to express yourself and your needs. The only button you need to find and push is your own. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me in the comments. And I would love to hear what you end up doing this week to take back your voice. Please let me know. You can send me a message or you can put a comment under this podcast. If you are a woman healing from divorce, you are not alone. This is a safe space here at the Divorce to Bliss podcast and through the Divorce to Bliss program to help you to become the best and highest version of yourself after divorce, to help you to heal, to help you to start a new life and find joy. And yes, it is possible to find joy. And it may not seem like that right now. It may not seem like that for a long time, but each of these steps you take, little baby steps towards healing, towards becoming this higher version of yourself, is going to put you closer and closer to discovering that joy. And one day, I promise it will happen. It'll happen, might be small, but it will happen. So please know that you are supported here. If you like this episode, please let me know in the comments. Please subscribe to this channel so you can get all the podcasts that hit, the new podcasts, and like, comment, and share, because you never know who may be out there and may need to hear this.